Welcome to the American Intelligence Media. I'm here today with Michael McKibben. My name is Douglas Gabriel, also known as Thomas Paine in the Ass of the Globalists, who I'm also speaking for Betsy Ross. You know, the one who made that beautiful 13-starred flag that seems to have just taken off as a symbol for our second American Revolution. Well, it was the symbol for the first. It was the meme for the first revolution. So we want to thank Betsy Ross, and we want to thank the people who are buying all these T-shirts from Rush Limbaugh. This is a wonderful thing. Now, what we see on the news, that is just hysterical. We've been laughing. And today, we want to give you our response to Robert Mueller's testimony. Now, you've heard me give my opinion multiple times, so we're going to start off with Michael McKibben talking about what he thought about this wonderful testimony of such a high-integrity person, Robert Mueller. What did you think, Michael?
I think that he was play acting, and he was acting like he was half senile, but I think that was all a show. What I think really went on there, and this is good news for patriots and the Republic, is he put on full display the proof that our republic has been destroyed by the legal profession. Because what we saw there is a man so arrogant that he just told our elected representatives when he would answer questions and when he wouldn't answer questions, and he essentially put them all in their place. And what we were really seeing there is the complete evidence that our country has been taken over by the senior executive service and its paymasters at the Department of Justice. That's what I think we saw.
I certainly saw that. And I see it because we know that no matter what happens in this congressional investigation, kangaroo court, witch hunt, complete nonsense that is going on in the three different committees, one led by the bullfrog, Jerry Nadler, one led by the angry Elijah Cummings, and one led by one of the people who was the most involved and complicit with the attack on Trump, Adam Schiff. Now, the reason Adam Schiff should actually be prosecuted here is because he was caught attempting to himself find evidence against Trump. He got in calls that were spoof calls. He sent people out to look for the PP document. When he heard that someone in Ukraine had actually said there's compromised material, he started searching all over for it. He keeps saying he has evidence. He has no evidence. And the only evidence they're going to talk about is in part 2 of the stupid report, which can't exist because part 1 says there was no crime, so part 2 there cannot be an obstruction of an investigation for no crime. Matter of fact, the people who constructed the idea that there should be a special counsel when there was no crime committed a crime. And yes.
Well, the Republicans were quite prepared to ask him substantive questions about different aspects of his massive report. And isn't it curious that whenever a question was asked that Mueller didn't want to answer or address, he just told him he wasn't going to address it. And anything related to Christopher Steele, the very source of the original dossier, he refused to answer questions on, and it appears to have cited ongoing investigations. Well, in a reasonable world, you could accept that explanation, but what we now see is that whenever an attorney for the Department of Justice wants to avoid answering a question, all they have to do is pick up the phone or go down the hall and ask somebody to start an investigation right before they come and testify, and then they have this carte blanche excuse for not answering any questions because it's an ongoing investigation. Well, guess what? That is the state of our justice system. We have attorneys at the Department of Justice that are totally out of control, and they are. Mueller was telling us, the American people, in that testimony, that he is not subject to we the people, because we elected those men and women that were were involved in that, and no one should be above we the people, the ones that empower the government to exist. And what Mueller was saying was these gods at the Department of Justice can avoid answering any question of accountability at any time by simply asking one of their friends to open an investigation so that they then can claim they can't answer it because of an ongoing investigation. And they just do this ad infinitum. So I think that, we talked about this the other day. What do we hope to get out of this testimony? Obviously, they weren't going to get any more comment on evidence. They avoided all discussion of the involvement of the British Privy Council in Alison Saunders and Arvinder Sembai and Joseph Mifsud and anybody related to London and Mueller's handlers in London. And so what we saw was our government is out of control, totally out of control. And what it tells me as an observer, as somebody who tries to solve problems, is until the senior executive service is defunded and the Department of Justice, the control of the paymasters at the Department of Justice over the senior executive service, until that is defunded, we don't have a government.
Yes, and people don't understand that the 500 people who do the final review to give bonuses and who actually decide on the people who are in the senior executive service, the shadow government, 10,000 left behind bureaucrats who 9,999 of them are basically Obama appointees and people who came in during the Obama time. And they basically are the resistance. So we know that the shadow government is the resistance. And, it's exactly as you say. And anytime that an SES member is ever confronted, like let's take Andrew McCabe, for instance. What happens to him? It goes to a grand jury, which is secret, and then we never get to hear what happens. We do not know what happened with Andrew McCabe's grand jury investigation, okay? So he's a senior executive service member. Nothing's going to happen. We know that it was recommended that he not be prosecuted, or that they had decided at that moment not to prosecute him, though they named all these different crimes he committed. And that's what happens. It's called a grand jury. It's a star chamber. It's what the British invented for their elite. So the monarchs and the landed gentry were all protected. If they got in trouble, they simply had a kangaroo court, which was a star chamber that no one was told about. It was secret, and it basically just cleared the elite. Or, on the other hand, if they went after their enemy, then they didn't have to bring evidence. They couldn't even have representation of their lawyer in the court when it was happening. Same thing that's happening in our grand jury now. Only 2 nations in the world use grand juries at this point. And one of them is Liberia, okay? The other one is us. They need to be thrown out. And the special counsel, there's never a need for a special counsel. They should be thrown out. And they quoted Janet Reno stating why the special counsel had to be under control. And it went exactly the way Janet Reno said, that if you allow a special counsel and a grand jury the controls that they have underneath the old law, and then it turned into a regulation, as we pointed out in our conversations and in our research, then what really happens is they're out of control. And so Sally Yates, who wrote a 58-page, I believe, response on Michael Horowitz saying, I want to see the content of the special counsel's investigation as the Department of Justice Inspector General, because it's part of my investigation. And what did she say? No, you can't.
Well, what we see here is what we've talked about before, in that these attorneys have so convoluted our laws and regulations and policies that it's the art of the exception. They have written, these lawyers have written into our laws and into our policies exceptions to everything under the sun. So Section A says a law like you think it should be said. Section B says they don't have to apply it if they don't want to. And our system of our judicial system has become so corrupted by this art of the exception, And the only people that know these things are these people who spend their whole lives, like Mueller, figuring out all of these exceptions and then how to apply them so that they benefit their friends and punish their enemies. Well, look at what they did with all of President Trump's people. He punished the enemies. He didn't punish a single Democrat that was doing the same thing or worse. And so clearly the partisan witch hunt was exactly that. And it was all conducted by lawyers from the Department of Justice. I mean, look, Bruce Orr is on that Council of 500 that's paying the SES. So how much more do we need to know? And a lot of the evidence that was presented, all SES names were always redacted. So until President Trump gets a handle on this stay-behind army of people within the bureaucracy, he's going to continue to get sabotaged at every turn.
At every agency. Every federal agency has leading it a senior executive service member who is called literally, in many cases, a general, because they are a paramilitary organization that does not take their order from the executive unless they have
their own documents that are submitted to Congress every 4 years actually say in the back of the document that they are not accountable to the executive, even though they're paid by the executive. I mean, this is just outrageous.
And
I mean, what company could operate if they have a whole series of these saboteurs in their running their organization that don't even report to the CEO of the company? That's what we've got here.
And these are
it's out of control.
Unqualified, overpaid people who were given fantastic bonuses for towing the line for what they are told to do. And they don't even know what they're doing. They're not even qualified to lead these agencies. What we do now...
You know, the problem is probably 3/4 of the congressmen and women that are working in Washington have relatives who are paid or under a pension from the SES. So here we continue to hear these crickets whenever this issue of the SES comes up. This is a dysfunctional system similar to an alcoholic where the family actually adapts to the sins of the alcoholic in order to allow their lives to go forward. Well, in this case, half of these people probably have pensions associated with the SES. No wonder our elected officials aren't talking about it, and certainly the bureaucracy's not talking about it because they're in on it. This is an intervention type environment where only we the people can fix this, and we have a government that's completely out of control and hijacked by this group of unelected bureaucrats.
And we can see this in this case as an absolute archetypal example. The congressional oversight of the Justice Department. The Justice Department is part of the executive, and Trump is supposed to be in charge of it, but the SES has run the Justice Department, and when Sessions was there was nobody representing Trump there, and that's the reason that it went completely awry and still is going awry. Same thing for the FBI. Christopher Wray is 100% complicit with this. He has the copies of the 33,000 missing Hillary emails. He knows that the DNC was not hacked by Russians. They have all the evidence. And today, I loved it. I heard Robert Mueller. I'm going to come back to some of the other things about SES in a second, but I just got to spit this out. I heard Robert Mueller say that, yes, he kept exculpatory evidence from being presented in his report. In other words, put him in jail. He had the evidence that proved that Trump was innocent, and he didn't bring it forth, but he then continued to insinuate with this smear, exactly as Janet Reno said, a special counsel could be misused in that way. So what we're talking about is also the fact that he clearly stated, when asked again and again about so many Democrats on his committee and how the people, how Ray, who represented Hillary, how is that? How Justin Cooper, who was represented by the guy sitting next to him, how Andrew Weissman was a Hillary supporter, all this stuff.
I saw that. They were squirming in the background behind him.
He finally said, and this is unbelievable, I think I'll have to get the transcript just to get the exact phrase, but he said, the purview of my investigation did not include Democrats.
Yeah.
He said those words. I mean, what are you talking about? You were supposed to be investigating Russian interference, and you knew that there was Democratic Russian interference, but there was no Republican, and so you didn't look at anyone who was a Democrat. So if they said they were a Democrat, you didn't look at them. He kept exculpatory evidence. He clearly did not look at anyone who was a Democrat. And the one I'm going to ask you to talk on is he clearly stated, and this is amazing, he actually half laughed when he repeated it, but he clearly stated that truth does not have to be spoken in a congressional testimony when he was speaking about Michael Cohen and others, but he clearly stated truth does not have to be spoken in a congressional testimony. In other words, you cannot perjure yourself if you know that there is a law that allows you to lie. Would you explain that for people?
Yes, the False Statements Accountability Act passed in 1996, subsection B, says that people testifying before Congress or before courts or administrative proceedings, the lawyers and the parties involved can lie. They're allowed to lie.
He knows that. He lied.
He knows that.
He lied so many times that, first off, the entire report is a lie. So every time he deferred to the report, he basically lied. Now, let's go on with your point that there are continuing cases. When Rod Rosenstein made the special counsel investigation so broad that he could investigate anything, including the size of Trump's grandmother's shoes, anything could be investigated after Rosenstein opened it up. And that's what they did. So they went after the low-hanging fruit. They went after people who, like Michael Cohen, like Manafort, like Rick Gates, but they didn't go after the other ones just like them, like Tony Podesta and John Podesta and Hillary Clinton. So what they did is they created situations where they knew it had nothing to do with Trump, but they could push it out to courts in Virginia, in D.C., and in the Southern District of New York, which they've done. 17 separate issues. They won't say how many cases. One of the cases is Stormy Daniels, good old horseface, who wants to say that, Federal Election Commission violations. Complete nonsense. It's already been thrown out by another court, and that court awarded even Trump lawyer fees. So it's going to go nowhere. But those 17 cases...
These lawyers who have the ability to indict people can just indict and at free will completely frivolous cases, and therefore bury any discussion or any need to talk about that case for years and years and years. These lawyers have completely rigged the system, and it's their way of getting out of talking about anything to do with their activity. And look at the way Congress just gave in to that. I mean, it's outrageous.
It is outrageous. As I said to you earlier before we came on air, if I was a Republican, I would have ripped his head off and I would have asked him a few questions that showed that he was completely corrupt. And then I would have just said, all other questions are yes or no. I wouldn't have let him give any of his dodging answers. And I would have simply then given a diatribe stating the crimes that he personally committed and the things that he's hiding. Things that aren't even part of the 17 other cases that, of course, are going to be one of the cases has been deferred. It's not deferred. It's been given over to the Department of Justice National Security Division. And it's the prosecution of the indictment of the 12 Russian GRU agents who don't even exist, by the way. They don't even exist. Those are just names on a piece of paper. And that case will then go on forever and ever. So therefore, Trump will never, ever not still be partially investigated because of the 17 cases that arose out of this. And as you say, that's just, legalism. That's what we call lawfare. It's like warfare, but it uses law and it uses the Department of Injustice, and it makes every judge and every lawyer like a monarch in their own court, or the lawyers are like landed gentry, the elite that are protected by star chambers when they get in trouble. But anytime that they want to go after an enemy, there's no problem with that. And that's what we saw there, just as you started off this conversation.
Well, this is a good example why in my world, I don't think that politicians should allowed to be lawyers, or a lawyer should not be allowed to be politicians, because the ones who make the laws cannot be in charge of helping enforce the laws. That's a conflict. It's an inbuilt conflict of interest. And so now what we've done is we have let that get so out of hand that half of Congress are now lawyers, and they have completely broken our republic.
Absolutely. Why would you let a lawyer create a law with a loophole in it that they could then tell their cronies about, which is really a kind of a form of deregulation? It's a deregulation through laws and regulations that get so complicated that nobody knows until years afterwards that Congress allowed the ability for crimes to happen. For instance, not funding the border wall when we're being attacked by supposed immigrants who are really invaders. That is a crime, but the Congress goes on with crimes left and right. For instance, what we just witnessed was the same thing that Mueller did with 9/11. It was a counterintelligence terrorist action against our own people, and in this case, our own president and our own election, and President-elect Trump, and everyone who voted for him, and basically every American who believes in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Again, it was Mueller. The same Mueller that didn't notice that on 9/11, Building 7 fell into its own footprint with a controlled demolition, though no plane hit it, and there were almost no fires involved in that. And no steel-reinforced building has ever fallen. By the way, what they forget is there was a plane that was sent into a building, I believe it was in Switzerland, to take out one of Mueller's enemies too. So, and he did that twice. So there have been other planes that he's flown into buildings. And I'm saying that Robert Mueller constructed and was part of the team that constructed and then covered up for 9/11, for the Oklahoma bombing, for Waco, and many other things. And the Uranium One, that was all him and Andrew McCabe. And so what I saw today, and I haven't finished seeing all of it, but I saw a man who was hiding the trail of his crimes and the crimes of Comey and all of the heads of the intelligence groups.
Like a senile bumbler, so people will feel sorry for him, and it'll fade away. I think that was such a fine act. Total theater on his part. Excuse me, Douglas. It's not too hard to do, really.
No,
I'm sorry, Doug. Can you repeat that? Oh no, I can't answer that.
In other words, he wasn't even listening to the questions, and he was just
Right.
stalling with them, repeating them. And one of a few things is possible. Either he's faking that he's senile. He's senile. He's got Alzheimer's and he's on drugs, and he didn't take his drugs. He's become so old that his brain doesn't work. But one thing is for certain, he's incompetent.
I don't believe that for a minute.
Yeah.
This was a total act.
Yeah, and it was also a cover-up. So it wasn't just hiding the trail. It's one of the biggest cover-ups in U.S. history. It was also a perfect act of FBI counterintelligence misinformation, disinformation, and spin, and basically creating a narrative that would be believed even though there's no evidence. There was no evidence whatsoever. We saw that he was completely incompetent. We saw that he was dissembling. We saw that he acted as the most arrogant person in U.S. history. We spent all that money and he won't answer anybody's questions. Now, if he would have explained, I can't do that because of the grand jury limitations on, or I can't do that because of the one.
Oh, he did. He did. I mean, they use that. That is their get-out-of-jail-free card for attorneys, Department of Justice attorneys, within the senior executive service. I'll have to give those caveats. That's their get-out-of-jail-free card for anything they don't want to talk about, and they get away with it. Congress lets them get away with it. The courts let them get away with it. Roberts lets them get away with it. Why? Because in my mind, our republic has been broken by these corrupt attorneys.
Oh, without a doubt. We brought over the British Inns of Court. We brought over the fact that at the top of the Inns of Court is the Queen's Court, which rules over all courts, and nobody gets to even know what happens in that court. Well, that's what a grand jury is. That's a star chamber. We don't even get to hear we'll never get to hear the evidence. It's protected because it's supposed to be in secret.
That's the other thing. He totally avoided any conversation related to what went on in London related to the Steele dossier. Completely, and in fact, one point he even intimated that it was a classified matter, which would then tell us why he's never dealt with Allison Saunders and Arvinder Singh Bai. So there we have it. I mean, he knows. He refused to answer all questions about Joseph Mifsud completely.
Well, because
the
that's
source of the dossier.
Right, the only Russian mentioned who's disappeared, who is a personal, close friend of Robert Mueller. They've trained together many times. They worked together. They worked together on 9/11. Remember, Joseph Mifsud was the trainer of Saudi intelligence that were involved in 9/11. And Robert Mueller, of course, slid into his job as the head of FBI. He was appointed 2 weeks before 9/11. Then he supposedly had appendicitis, and then he came to work a couple weeks later. And so, therefore, he's cleared of knowing anything. He couldn't have been any part of it. Wrong.
But keep in mind, at that point, they had hired Arvinder Singh Bai in London, who was a senior Crown prosecutor, and she and Mueller indicted a guy by the name of Lofty Racy. Anyway, and then accused him of being the trainer of 4 of the hijackers who flew into the buildings. And as it turns out, by 2010, that guy was completely exonerated, and the judge actually said that he was falsely accused on all counts. So that means Arvinder Singh Bai and Robert Mueller persecuted a guy using the legal system in our country and in Britain, and completely got away with it. Where is our press? Who is holding these people accountable?
Well,
our system of government is totally out of control.
The Five Eyes always cover for each other. So when they don't have evidence in America to show that Muslims, the ones that they claim were piloting those airplanes, which they weren't, we know that is impossible, they went to Britain. And Arvinder Singh Bai, the FBI contact in London, all these years, best buddies with Robert Mueller, constructed false evidence, which later was proven to be false evidence,
right.
Just to create the narrative, just so that the narrative would be found by intelligence from agents in Britain. And we can't really look at it. We don't know how they found it.
The press release all happened the same day throughout the world. And by the way, Arvinder Singh Bai had a different name then. It was Arvinder Sambi. And so every time Mueller used her name changed.
And remember, Arvinder Singh Bai was the coordinator of the rogue intelligence groups out of London, including the ex-head of the MI6, Sir Richard Dearlove, including Sir Carr, who was the head of the Joint Intelligence Group, including the active MI5, active MI6, including then Stephen Halper, a dual citizen who between Britain and America, who has 3 basically CIA money laundering banks right in Washington, D.C. He was paid over $1 million. He was then coordinating and was literally step by step working with Christopher Steele as he worked on the dossier and how to make sure that the evidence was then presented to the different elements in the American intelligence community to make sure that it was effective. So it was he who brought in Alexander Downer. He brought in Mifsud.
And Mueller would not answer a single question about Christopher Steele. The center of this 3 years of witch hunt, President Trump seems to be one of our last hopes to get control of the senior executive service. He can defund them. If they don't get out of the way, we don't have a government.
And if William Barr does not start an investigation that uncovers these things, to bring it right back to John McCain, brings it right back to the Senate Intelligence Committee, Dianne Feinstein, and unfortunately, Mark Warner, but also the Republicans that are on that committee also. They're all guilty because they were all communicating with Christopher Steele saying, yes, bring us more dirt on Trump. And then you have John Brennan paying $100,000 to anybody who say that they can go looking for the PP video, which was found, and it had nothing to do with Trump. And then you have Comey and his 28 attempts of October surprises that he couldn't seem to time right. And then you have all the entire fake DNC hacking of the Russians to blame it on Trump when it was actually the exposure that they found for Hillary Clinton for the 2016 election was her connection to Russia, Uranium One, taking $145 million in her foundation to being paid off with basically emolument buy-offs. This is what they were hiding, and they're still trying to hide it because Hillary still ain't done.
Every American you just mentioned was senior executive service.
Oh, yes.
Every one of them.
Absolutely.
We've got a rogue system of government run out of the senior executive service that says on paper in documents before Congress that they don't report to the president. So who in the heck do they report to? Well, I think we know.
Yeah, we know exactly
Council.
who they report to. Now, other things that you have mentioned, first off, I want to jump to this point. We know that Jerry Nadler and Adam Schiff and Elijah Cummings have spent the last 3 weeks going over the very questions that they were going to ask Mueller, but they didn't do it with Mueller, they did it with his team. So when they were asked today the question, Jerry Nadler started off, did any Democratic representative of this committee send you any questions they'd be asking? He said, no, that's correct. It was their assistants. It was their, this is the way that it goes, right?
They're tricky lawyers. They parse the truth.
It's a fact that for the last 3 to 4 weeks, nonstop, Mueller's team has been meeting with Nadler's team. We know that they did this already before. We don't even know how much time was spent with Michael Cohen, a person who's already charged with lying. He was quoted repeatedly. And then you got to hear that George Nader, the person most referred to in the Mueller investigation, has now been charged with child trafficking and pornography, and he's gone to jail. The pedophiles in Washington, D.C. and Hollywood haven't gone to jail. Now, have they yet? Even Epstein didn't really have to go to jail the first time, now did he? So we can see the witness tampering that happened with these 3 committees, which is a crime. And then they put on this dog and pony show. Well, we predicted ahead of time there would be no new evidence, that he would simply be deferring, that I didn't predict that he would be talking down to us so bad and spitting on justice so bad. I had no idea that anybody could have so much pride, hubris, and disgusting arrogance. I have never seen that in my entire life, not in U.S. history, not in history anywhere. The only person who comes close is Peter Strzok, who was, violently angry that we were asking him questions about his treasonous activity. So, when it comes down to it, let's also remember that they asked good old Herr Mueller, good old witch hunter Mueller, good old, perpetrator and complicit with 9/11 Mueller, the man who wrote the new laws for our government and regulations to hide evidence. He is the king of hiding exculpatory evidence. He actually created some of the laws and created some of the regulations that are used and started those things with Waco, with Ruby Ridge, with Oklahoma bombing. This was all using the bad justice system, the injustice system that Robert Mueller's created. You cannot get an eviler person. He is the DC fixer. He's the DC rigger. He has always been there for a price. And just today, I loved it when I heard him say, I didn't go to talk to Trump so that to try to get that job of being the head of the FBI. Yeah. Yes, you did. Yes, you did. And everyone knew that, and you said it, and everybody talked about it. What are you talking about? So He's such a liar. But the thing that I loved the most was when he was asked by a Republican whether or not this was just an attempt to continue the committee for impeachment and that this is about impeachment. He said, I'm not going to answer any questions about impeachment. I bet you're not. And that just shows exactly who he was. It shows that there is no congressional oversight. It shows that the Department of Justice is, as you say, running the SES, and they run the bureaucracy of all the agencies, including the Justice Department, including the Supreme Court, including our military, including all branches of the executive. So what we have here is an outright war, and we are seeing that the general, because General Herr SS Mueller is one of the major leaders of the SES and has been since its inception. He also was part of the technology cabal that stole Leader Technologies' trade secrets. And so we are fighting the same guy, and Comey was right there with him. And what we're doing, and so was Hillary, and so was Bill, and so was Chandler, the man who taught him how to pass a law, make sure a law was passed so you can lie to Congress. No problem. Yep. You can lie to Congress. No such thing as perjury. No one ever goes to jail from a congressional investigation. No one is ever charged with anything that comes to any consequences. What happens is, if the elite get caught by Congress through one of these investigations, it goes to a grand jury like Andrew McCabe. Remember, Andrew McCabe had 5 separate investigations on him. They're only looking at one of them.
That guy sitting to his left, right behind him, was Goldstein, who represented J.P. Morgan in the bank bailout slap on the wrist. And his firm, Weiss, has hired Jeannie Ray, since she left, and has also hired Loretta Lynch. So this is getting to be a small group of people now as they keep taking care of each other. And by the way, I should mention everybody I just mentioned was Senior Executive Service.
It's almost...
So the Senior Executive Service has got to go if we want our country. If we want a country, they have got to be defunded and sent packing.
Absolutely.
And that will shake up the bureaucracy. I don't think until that happens, anything's going to happen. As an engineer who looks at structures and foundations and the way things are put together, they have got a very tight system right now. And until it's defunded, President Trump's not going to get anything done outside of executive orders, because anything to do with the bureaucracy is going to be stymied.
Yes, I'll give an example. John Kerry, still acting like he's the Secretary of State. He was complicit in all of this, remember. Everyone forgets to mention his name as one of the top criminals who was right there and knew it from the beginning and then continued on that work. The 7th floor of the Secretary of the Department of State.
So are you saying that this stuff that's going on with Iran might have had something to do with John Kerry's recent visit there?
That's what I'm talking about. That's where I'm headed. So here's Trump. And he puts sanctions on Iran, and then he gets Germany and the EU to say, we're not going to abide by them. We're going to do a runaround. And then John Kerry goes over and meets repeatedly. Again, he has this is breaking the Logan Act. This is breaking this makes him a traitor, makes it treasonous. He's conducting business with our enemy. We have sanctions on them. They are threatening to kill all Americans. They're threatening to blow up any ships. They're threatening to blah, 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 blah. So John Kerry, what does he do? Not only was he part and parcel of making sure that $150 billion was given to Iran so that they could basically have all the money they need for radical Islamic terrorism throughout the world, and then giving them $1.5 billion in the cash denominations that they asked for. But after Trump came to power, he continued to negotiate with them, saying, don't worry, we're going to get rid of Trump. Don't worry, we're going to get rid of Trump. Aziz and his assistants have come out and said this, and they gave full, long transcripts of what Kerry said. And this is what happened. Kerry allowed 250 Iranian spies to enter our country, and he placed them in high positions in our government agencies throughout. They have not been removed. I think about a dozen of them have been discovered, and they've been kicked out of our country for being spies. That was John Kerry, and this was well known when it happened, but Trump can't stop it because senior executive service members were told to allow this to happen.
Allow that to happen. They're allowed to waive their normal security protocols anytime they want.
And this is how we got Imran Awan, a Pakistani spy, basically stealing all of Hillary's emails, all of them, not the missing 33,000, them too, Podesta and everything at the DNC. It was not the Russians. It was Imran Awan, it was the Chinese, it was the Israelis, it was all kinds of people, and it was also an internal breach, probably by Seth Rich, twice. Seth Rich was one of them, and we don't know who the second one was. But the point is, the exculpatory evidence is in their face, and this is what Mueller is excellent at. He's not allowing Julian Assange to come over with the exculpatory evidence to prove there was no Russian hacking. The entire thing crumbles, including obstruction, the second that he talks to Julian Assange and gets the proof. Same thing with Kim.com. Same thing with Guccifer 1. Same thing with the man they tried to say in a Czechoslovakian jail is Guccifer 2, which he is not. And on and on and on. There's a whole group of people who've proven it was not a hack. It was an internal breach of someone who had access.
William Binney proved it was not a hack.
Exactly. In his group, I was going to mention them. So what we're dealing with here is this is institutionalized, and we have to stop these institutions. And here's the deal. When they sent Andrew McCabe to Judge Liu, Jesse Liu, I predicted what would happen. I predicted it would be slow walk to nothing. He wouldn't be charged, and or they would choose not to prosecute, which is exactly what happened. We don't get to hear any of the evidence. It's all secret, and all five of Andrew McCabe's investigations disappear.
Well, and guess what? Once you have had something like that happen with those claims, they can never be brought again. You can't be sued for the same claims twice. And so this is the other game. They love it when their people go to court, because sooner or later those people get exonerated. And this is, the whole game is rigged. These attorneys have broken our republic, and these petty bureaucrats, not petty bureaucrats, but these embedded bureaucrats have the whole system under their control. It is not in Donald Trump's hands right now. But I think he could change that quickly by taking away their money.
Well, let's look at another example. Michael Horowitz, Department of Justice, IG, Inspector General. What do we get? He looks at politicalization of the DOJ and the FBI, which is 1,000%. And what does he find? Oh, he finds there's some, but it's not bias enough, and nothing happens. And so they get some sensitivity training on having too much bias, even though they took money from reporters, even though they broke every law that you can possibly break. They broke every contract. They broke every security agreement. And he names all of them, and then they're exonerated, just as you pointed out. And so when Robert Mueller got together with James Comey before he testified, after he was fired, and after Robert Mueller was appointed the special counsel, what happened? Robert Mueller met with James Comey to coach him before his testimony before Congress. How is that possible? It's because it is institutionalized as a standard operating procedure. So what you see is with Robert Mueller is the same thing you saw with the Warren Commission with the death of JFK. The man who conducted it was the man who actually led the 6 different groups that killed JFK, Allen Dulles. Okay? So when we had the 9/11 Commission, it was Cheney who controlled everything. He didn't let the 28 pages get revealed. He didn't let Bush speak when they asked him questions. He said he was in control of the whole thing. Don't ask Bush. On and on and on. So who did it? He did it. And who covered up? Oh, that would be Robert Mueller, the man investigating. He covered it up. That's true with all these stories. Now, the IG comes out and they say, or let's look at Andrew McCabe, same thing. Oh, here's all of his crimes. We're not going to charge him. Oh, how about James Comey and Hillary? Here's all of her crimes. We're not going to charge her. We now hear that leaks are coming out to prepare us all that Michael Horowitz's report on all of this, he's doing 7 other reports. Don't forget, Jeff Sessions refused to do anything. He gave over the investigations of leaks to Horowitz. He gave over all the investigations of Clinton Foundations to Horowitz. He gave over all the investigations to Horowitz. The investigations of FISA, the investigations, FISA court abuse, blah 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 blah.
You know what all these are. There's Main Street, and then there's this embedded bureaucracy. What they do, I think, that is they they take the temperature of Main Street. They don't want to get Main Street too upset. So if Main Street's really upset about a particular subject, they'll pretend to pay attention to it and pretend to be tough guys on the subject, and they'll start a commission or they'll file a suit or whatever to get it moving. First thing that does is that throws it into confidentiality so nobody can talk about it. So they wait for the public to stop thinking about the subject while they carry on with their private proceedings, and many of them are sealed. And then they wait until nobody's paying attention to it anymore, and then all of a sudden, quietly, someone gets exonerated, or the charges are dropped on a motion for summary judgment, or a motion to dismiss, or somebody screws up and there's some technical procedure that allows them to get off. And they just wait around for this, but they wait until the public is no longer paying attention. They got this game down.
Oh, yeah. And an IG report is made exactly like a special counsel report. It's made to the Attorney General, and then the Attorney General decides what to do with it. It can be totally secret, and no one's even supposed to know about it if it came from a grand jury or it came from certain directions. Because if no one's been indicted, no one's supposed to hear about it, because people are innocent until proven guilty. And so we are just seeing the worst abuse of this that I've ever seen in U.S. history, and it's sticking right in our face, and it is absolutely systemic. And if we don't do something about it, and we can do a lot about it, it's very, very, very easy to solve these problems. Defund the senior executive service.
Correct.
Make all federal courts be within the bounds of the only place where the federal government exists, Washington, D.C. There shouldn't be any federal courts in any states, and they certainly don't overrule state, and that's what happens. Anytime the elite want something solved, they send it to a federal court, to a judge that's stacked. So we have to have elected judges, and we have to be able to get rid of judges for making bad decisions, like the decisions that are being made by the Supreme Court. We need to be able to say, I'm sorry, we're not going to elect them by political partisanship. By appointment. We're going to elect them by their judgment, because these judgments, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, does she have any judgment? Does her mind work? Who knows? And what we're seeing here is the manipulation of all three branches of our government, and
Right.
You're seeing the lack of power
what
of Congress.
most of us have experience with in work is if you do good work and you produce a good product, you get paid and you keep your job. And that is not happening with our judges. They can be totally incompetent. They can lose one case right after another. They can make one bad decision right after another, and nothing happens to them. They need to be fired like everybody else.
Well,
and they have
absolutely.
all these eloquent arguments for why that shouldn't be, and they should have freedom of latitude and judicial discretion and blah, 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 blah. And you know what? I used to respect those rules. But now I see they just hide their misconduct behind these rules. And by the way, they're all getting great little investment tips because most of these people become wealthy on the bench. Now, that ought to tell you enough right there.
They become mega millionaires with their little salary. Judge Contreras, who was part of the initial impaneling of the grand jury by Robert Mueller, close personal friends of Peter Strzok. Oh, he recused himself after the judgment. How is this even possible? How about if you take Imran Awan's case? They
Robert
just simply
Mueller,
replaced the judge.
John Roberts, who is supposed to be managing the discipline for the judiciary, is asleep at the wheel, and worse, he's in on it because his investments are massive as well. And so what we've got is a system that takes care of the old boys. And the bureaucracy, the senior executive service, makes sure they're taken care of, and that is those are the people that are running our government. And our elected officials have if they're not in on it by the time when they get there, they're somehow cajoled into it by either compromise or by choice, and so consequently, us on Main Street are left holding the bag. And Mueller gave us a gift today. He showed us that that's the way it is.
And if you want to say that the emperor has no clothes, not new clothes, really beautiful new clothes. Oh no, there's no clothes. Then you are considered alternative news, and you are squelched, you are kicked off, you are in any way they try to get rid of you. So thank you. We're going to end this now because we want to get this out immediately because people were begging to get our opinion on this. And we'll give more opinions later, especially as we take apart the testimony of Robert Mueller, so that we can basically, tell jokes about a man who believes that it wasn't his job to look at any Democrats, or that you don't have to tell truth to the Congress, or that, yes, I did keep exculpatory evidence. Matter of fact, he sounded like he kept quite a bit of exculpatory evidence, and he says this out loud and gets away with it. This is where we're at, but we're awake.
There's two ways. There's two ways to be creative. Either you define something by what it is, or you observe what something is by what it isn't. And in Mueller's case, all we have to do is look at the things he didn't say, and that's the truth.
And I'd like to look at his testimony as legal vomit from a mass murderer who actually has committed treason and should go to jail for what we heard him testify today, simply for no other reason except for his arrogance, which demonstrated that he was hiding a cover-up that is actually the largest cover-up in American history. So, Michael, thank you for sharing your opinion with us today, and let's do some more research and get back together and talk about this again.
You're welcome, and say hello to Betsy.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.